Hey there, creatives. Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm really excited to bring episode 4 of the 2023 Voices from the Expressive Therapy Summit special series to you. This episode features a conversation that I had with Mindy Jacobson-Levy, who is an art therapist and who practices in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. She currently practices solely online, but prior to that, she had practices in both states. And she is a Soul Collage facilitator, and she's going to be teaching at the upcoming virtual Expressive Therapy Summit on April 22nd on Soul Collage and how to use Soul Collage as a pathway towards illumination and balance for professionals, which sounds like it will be really amazing. And of course, she's going to teach ways to integrate that into your clinical work as well. And you can find more about that and the other trainings that she's doing through the summit in June in the live in-person event in Atlantic City. She's going to be teaching on altered books and soul collage. And she'll also be at the virtual November East Coast Summit, and she'll be teaching in a trauma panel. And she's also probably going to be doing some things on altered books and soul collage there. You can find more about all of those workshops by heading over to the summit's website, www.expressivetherapysummit.com. And there you can click on the virtual tab and you'll find her workshop that's going to happen on the 22nd. You can attend from anywhere because it's via Zoom, but it should be really amazing. And without further ado, here's our conversation.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative, focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm very excited to welcome my next guest, Mindy Jacobson-Levy. And she is a board-certified registered art therapist, a licensed professional art therapist in New Jersey, a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and a trained Soul Collage facilitator. She's currently the president of the Pennsylvania Art Therapy Association and previously received the Honorary Life Member Award and Innovative Applications of Art Therapy Award, both given by the Delaware Art Therapy Association, which is now the Pennsylvania Art Therapy Association. Mindy's art therapy work has included serving individuals impacted by trauma and eating disorders, as well as a gamut of psychological issues from childhood to adulthood. She provides professional supervision. She's a national speaker and author. Her most recent publication is Creative Destruction and Transformation in Art Therapy, Reframing, Reforming, Reclaiming, which was with Gretchen Miller, and that came out in 2022 in the American Art Therapy Association Journal. And in addition to other publications, she's co-authored Finding Your Voice Through Creativity, the Art and Journaling Workbook for Disordered Eating, and has assisted in authoring the guidelines for treating dissociative identity disorder in adults. And Mindy is also a mixed media artist herself. And welcome, Mindy.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have you.
I do want to tell you that it's actually the Delaware Valley Art Therapy Association.
Oh,
So that we are, at one point we did include the tri-state area, which was Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. However, Delaware and New Jersey both have their own associations. And then several years ago, we morphed into across the state of Pennsylvania and we combined a couple of components and we became the Pennsylvania Art Therapy Association. So we're actually still working on that official name change, but that's who we are.
Oh,
Yes.
wow. Okay. It was like written in there, so I was just following what was there. Interesting. How far is Delaware from Pennsylvania?
Oh, it's not far at all. Maybe within the confines of the city itself, it might be 45 minutes or so.
Oh,
It's
wow.
it's not far at all. Delaware's a very tiny state and it's super close to us. So yeah, it's about 45 minutes to an hour. Yeah.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about how you've been in the field a long time. Let's talk about a little bit how you kind of made your way into facilitating Soul Collage. Um, I know that's a big part of your work. I know you frequently present at the Expressive Therapy Summit on that topic and on the topic of altered books. What kind of pulled you into that work?
Well, I was a painter for a really long time and living in various situations, I didn't have the room for the types of canvases that I like to work on, which were huge. So Altered Books it's an interesting way of creating a multitude of visual narratives in a very small space. And so I kind of fell into that backwards because I attended a workshop and I thought this is the neatest thing I ever saw. I also, by history, I've always been a cutter and destroyer of things and then recreate them. I do that with my clothing. I've done that. I did that with my sister's hair early on. I recreated a hairdo for her when she put gum on my pillow one evening. So the next day I cut her hair. So I've always been creative in those ways. And so Altered Books became a real phenomenon for me, maybe for about 14 years or so after attending a workshop with Amanda Bechtel. Thought this was marvelous. And so she and I started to do some work together. Soul Collage, I had attended several workshops at the summit. Oh my goodness. Whenever Barry started presenting on Soul Collage. And quite frankly, I thought some of it was a little woo-woo for me, a little off, a little odd. And then I took another workshop with a different presenter, and it sort of allowed me to understand what all the others were saying, which I really just didn't get ahead of time. I also had bought Seena Frost's book and thought it was extremely difficult to understand. And a Soul Collage facilitator training happened in September 2019. And I told my husband at the time, I'm going to a conference and this is what's going to happen. And he looked at it and said, this looks a little bit unusual. What are you doing? I said, well, actually, I think it's going to be a great retreat for me. And it was one of the best things I ever did. I was in a camp style bunk room with absolutely zero amenities, shared toilet, shared bathroom. I don't even think we had a heat. It was just crazy. But it was a beautiful retreat center, vegetarian, with I think all sorts of groups came to do, I guess, very personalized retreats. And there I was with maybe 12 other folks and delving into Soul Collage. And I fell deep in love, deep in love. Because unlike, first of all, collage is remarkable. So I've always been a collager. I use that in Altered Books. But this was different because with two images, a background image and a foreground, a focal point, you could go anywhere. And I thought that's great. It's portable. It's easy to do. You don't have to be an art therapist to be engaged in it. However, coming from an art therapy perspective, there's so much more you can do with it than general folks because you can use the imagery projectively. So it's just remarkable. And I kind of fell into it. And there you go. Since then, I think I said to Barry, I'd like to do a workshop on Soul Collage. And he had a couple of other folks doing things, but he's always been very generous with me. Go for it. You can do this, have fun. And I started working with Soul Collage. So it's been really great. I'm going to be presenting this in April, on April 22nd specifically. And this presentation is around illuminating and balancing for professionals. I use it with my clients. This methodology is great. It's a wonderful segue starting a session. because you can take 15 minutes, you can do a quick card rather than how are you, what's new, the typical questions we ask, how was your week, blah, blah, and 20 minutes go by. It's sort of like, hi, how are you today? And they begin to talk and I say, well, how about, let's see if we can do a soul collage piece on that. And so they, depending on what they brought up, I might suggest a direction or not. Or they had a difficult week. Okay, let's do difficult. Let's see what that might look like. Let's find an image that might suggest it and a background that fits. And then we'll do a narrative. And the narrative might be the typical soul collage narrative, or it might be a variation of a theme, which is what my history of learning allows me to do, and my credentialing allows me to do, taking it outside of the more formalized directive and maybe moving it somewhere else. And so it's a great way. So from that, I started using it in supervision for reflective art making. And so I do that with myself as well. And that's kind of how that started. And I thought, wow, this is just an incredible way. I was using altered books in between sessions. Barbara Fish talks a lot about, it's one of her mainstays, doing reflective art making, which is probably the most important element in my entire 40 years of practice, or 45 or however at this point. Probably the most important thing I've learned is the importance of art making for art therapists and reflective work for all therapists. It is such an inroad to understanding what's going on with our clients, our responses to them, as well as knowing it is time for a vacation. Reflective art.
Yes.
Yes, it helps us see that. So the part about illuminating, it's not, the illumination and the balance happens, I think, with good therapists. We are always balancing and we are always illuminating, not only within a client setting, but within ourselves. And if we aren't doing that work, the day I stop doing that work is the day I stop working, because if I'm not illuminating anything for others and myself, what am I doing? What's my purpose? So that's kind of where this started. And it's a great and super easy way between clients. Even if you don't do the write-up, you finish a session, something gets brought up, there's a piece you want to explore further, and or a response or a strong response, and you put it into an image. Easy peasy. 2 things on a 5x8 card, two images.
Yeah, can you break it down exactly, like, what it is for listeners that maybe aren't an art therapist? Maybe they're a music therapist or another expressive arts therapist that might be listening that haven't had any exposure to the soul collage method. What it is, because you're speaking about it, like the image, the collage itself, and then the narrative, but some people might not know.
Of course, sure. It was developed by Seena Frost, and I don't have any of those notes with me.
Oh,
However,
that's okay.
she has a wonderful book. She has 2 books, and the newest book, maybe revolving around soul collage, I forget the exact name, is a bit of a confusing bunch of texts, unless you maybe get a little bit more training. But once you get some familiarity, it actually makes sense. So she was taking some courses. She had a master's in divinity and was taking a course with Jean Houston, like a 2-year course on imagery and therapy and whatever. And she decided that she was going to make these cards for everybody in her class, and there were over 100 people in her class. And so she took small cards. I'm not even sure if they were 5x8 at the time. That might have been standardized later. She called them netter cards. Netter is an Egyptian word that means energy. And she called them energy cards, and she made one for everyone in her class. And I'm not sure whether that was part of her coursework or everyone had to do a project. And from that, she brought that into her counseling and her therapy practice as well, and recognized that this was a great way to get people engaged, because at that point, and I'm a purist, I will say that, I'm in a Soul Collage group of professionals, and we all laugh because I'm the purist. I believe that one image, one focal image, and one background image for me is the way to go, because the more complex the visual imagery gets, the more voices that speak from the card. So So it's on a
Yes.
5x8 card. You and now there can be it can be a focal point. There can be a focus of the particular card or group that you're running, let's just say. And so with that, you ask a person to pick out one image to be the focal point of the card, and then a background to set that image on. And then you journal about it. And the journal is a narrative, generally goes like this. I am one who, ... I want you to ... My gift to you is, and then anything else you want to tell me. And of course, once you, when you become a Soul Collage facilitator, you're given license to work with that more fluidly and take other avenues with that as well. So, but it can be done in any kind of a individual or group setting. It does help to get training because there are various things that happen with the cards. So for example, when I generally teach at the summit, I'll be teaching about 3 of the, there are 4 basically elements of the cards. There are committee members, which is the psychological, the self parts of oneself. Not necessarily dissociated parts, that gets more complicated, but our self parts, the parts of me, the part of me that was a little nervous earlier, the part of me that was excited about doing this, things like that, the professional part that is, whatever. So we have our own parts. Then we have community parts that are involved in our lives too. Those are the people outside of ourselves, the influencers that affect us positively. We generally don't work with toxic parts outside of ourselves. We don't generally bring those parts in because that's not part of a deck. So what happens is we create cards, and the cards eventually build our deck. Those are 2 of the suits. There's also the council suit, which are the archetypes. So she had a lot of influence with Jung, Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, people a lot of youngins don't even know anymore. But these are old school humanistic psychologists and transpersonal psychologists and therapists who worked in different ways with treatment. May have been Freudian based initially or whatever else, analytically trained, but they moved forward. So she brought a lot of those philosophies in creating this methodology, later then called Soul Collage. And then the 4th suit is the companion suit, which is the energy suit, which are chakras. And it was that suit specifically that had me thinking, this is too woo-woo for me. And I will tell you, in reality, I don't get that involved in that suit. And the group that I'm with, we don't get that involved with the suit. So in order to solicit those parts of ourselves, you have a 20-minute narrative that Seena directs you to read. You have to read that. You're identifying the chakra. You give it an animal. It becomes an animal. So it actually is interesting because it's body focused, except that if you are not of the chakra mindset necessarily, or a bit more traditional, like someone like me, I need more assistance with that suit. So I only have a few of my chakras done, and it's several years later. And I don't usually bring it in because I don't feel equipped to teach the chakras. I'm not educated enough in that. So, but anyway, you've got these 4 suits. Then you've got a couple of other transpersonal cards, which are different, and they kind of watch the witness, the soul essence, they kind of watch over things. And that stuff can turn people off. And it did with me in the beginning, because the way that you would play out the Soul Collage experience was with these observers and these transpersonal parts, and they don't talk, and it got confusing. When we broke it down, my colleagues and I, and just learned about like our individual parts and the parts outside of ourselves, very akin to IFS. I'm working with I'm pushing some of my IFS compadres to unite with me, and let's do some work together because it's so fluid. Those 2 blend perfectly. Anyway, that's kind of what happened. And it was super exciting to work with it. A client could be talking about their whatever, their partner, or a teacher who had a good influence, or an abuser, or, well, you wouldn't really work with an abuser, but we would work around that. If there was an abuser, then we would find a counterpart for that was maybe a safety person, and create a card for, let's say, that safety part. So we could have all this, basically your deck, I've got several hundred cards already.
And
And
so after you make your deck, how do you then continue to use them, or is it a one and done situation?
it's a forever thing. I will, at some point in my life, I will have a room filled with cards, the whole room will filled with cards. Actually, people do retire cards. I'm not retiring any yet. I'm too early in my practice to necessarily, a few years in, decide that something doesn't necessarily make sense. Some soul collagers will retire cards and not use them anymore. I am of the persuasion, just like art, just like you can look at a painting today and it looks one way, and 3 days from now, you have a different lens and it could look differently. And soul collage is the same thing. So for example, even if you have one focal image and you have a background that has sky or trees in it, the trees could talk too. And the sky could have a voice too. And the water. So although traditionally soul collage was focused on that one image to start, that was the voice of the card. It can move in other directions. So basically, you use your card for dialogue. You dialogue with the voice of the card. You, the creator, asks the card, "Who are you?" And the card says, "I am one who," and elaborates. And then you ask, basically, what do you want from me? What are the gifts you have to offer? Things like this. And it's projective. Obviously, it's in a projective method. So you can use that. So what some people, you can read cards. What some people do, and I've done this a few times at the summit. We usually, I'll have very directed ways of reading cards where you might pull 2 or 3 cards if we create 8 or 10. I usually shoot for 8 or 10, which is a lot in a setting. But in 6 hours, you can do that if you wish, and some can be quick cards. You can have a spiraling dialogue where you pull from your deck. So of a deck of a few hundred, I might decide I'm going to do a reading. And so maybe my question is, should I retire in 2035? We'll just give it that date.
Okay.
Should I retire in 2035? And I might pull 4 cards and I would ask that same question of the 4 cards and see what the response is. So basically, you're illuminating internal thoughts and feelings based on the projective elements that are in front of you. And as odd as that sounds, it's incredibly evocative and informative and illuminating and ultimately balancing. So there are times when I try to pull a card every day, and just pull the card. I put it on this little easel and I might kind of ask that card, what do I need to do today? And that card, I am responding with something from the card. So that's kind of what happens with your deck. People use their decks in a lot of ways. There's a whole network, what's called the World of Soul Collage. It's something that I am involved with online. I forget the name of there are 4 or 5 different pathways you can choose. And if you are a Soul Collage facilitator, you can choose like a professional, that pathway. So I can join that for X amount. Maybe it's $99 now. And they have a lot of incredible meetups and ways to read your cards. I just did one recently, which was, the title of it was with Michelle Manos. She's a brilliant psychologist and an attorney who's a Soul Collage facilitator in her spare. She was based out of Arizona, and now I think she moved to California. But she does workshops. You can go attend them for free if you're a Soul Collage facilitator and you're a member of this website and this group. And it was on disorientation, which is, aren't we all disoriented these days? And you pulled a card. She gave us a narrative, not the typical, who are you? I am one who, but these other questions we had to answer, like I am, I wonder, I think, I hope, things like that. And you fill it in. Then she had us turn the card upside down so that it was disoriented, and we had to do the same things. It was the most illuminating thing I've done in quite a while. It was mind-blowing. So yeah, it's as simple as that. So yes, I encourage training because the 4-day training was incredibly, it was a gift. It was truly a gift.
Mm.
It wasn't inexpensive. They do have it online. I would like to encourage anybody who's listening to really take into account that there is nothing like being in a room with others who are training and working this together. It's because in this beautiful environment. Mine was in upstate New York in this beautiful retreat center, with no heat and bees, everything else. But it was super cool. Yeah, because it was really super exciting. So I encourage people, if you're interested, to really attend the in person, or well, you can attend the all day on the 22nd of April, which is an all day Soul Collage one. I'll also be doing an intro and there'll be intro in that as well. It's just great. I've never heard a negative word about it. And I can tell you, I was so reluctant initially at the summit. I'm like, this is crazy. Crap got crazy. And then one day it just, it became illuminated, just like the first client I worked with MPD, now DID. When I was allegedly doing the work, it didn't make any, okay. And then all of a sudden, kaboom, I had this incredible illumination because I saw it in the artwork. It wasn't someone telling me about a diagnosis. And that's kind of what happens with Soul Collage. And I will say it's similar with altered books. Altered books generally, though, it takes a bit more. There are more supplies, but you can do more things. You can rewrite a narrative in a different way. So it's a very different methodology and process. But I could do altered books for illumination as well, and balance. I actually worked on 2 COVID books during COVID, started an altered book when COVID started. I worked on that book for 1 year.
Oh
The
my
book,
gosh.
the book probably weighs maybe 8 or 9 pounds, maybe more. It is huge. And it was my way of not even rewriting my narrative. It was embracing the narrative around me with COVID.
Sure.
And working through, and I did it in a linear fashion. So Soul Collage is not done in a linear fashion. You make your cards and they go into a bin, wherever you keep them, and you pull cards randomly. You don't look at them. You randomly pull a card if you're doing a reading. So with Soul Collage, when you're creating the card, of course, you tend to hopefully do a reading then. If I'm doing a collage, a Soul Collage card as a reflective piece between clients, I often don't have time to do a writing piece on it. I may jot a few things. I'll do that later. But with altered books, that is something, that particular book for COVID was a narrative piece. And then year 2, I started a second book. And when I look at these 2 books combined, it is a visual narrative of what was happening in the times and a reconstruction of my dealing with it over a 2-year period. It was actually published in the ADA Journal. I mean, in the ADA, not ADA Journal, on the ADA website. It was a published piece that they asked me to do.
Oh, wow.
I forget it was something like muddling my way through the pandemic. And with that book is my early on book, and you'll see my distress in the book. I mean, I had to make that book. I had to make the book. So yeah.
It's interesting how like it just when it has to happen, it calls to you. You can't not answer the call. Have to do
Yes.
it.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, with Soul Collage, I think it's why I think about my work and why I'm not going anywhere so fast, because I graduated in 1978, and I feel like the passion I have for our field is just the same as it was.
You have a
So
tremendous amount of energy about you and how much you love the work that you do, which is amazing. And as long as you have the energy and you have purpose, I
yes,
mean, that's so important for us as we get into these later stages to continue to have purpose and meaning in our life. Um, I
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
live in Florida. I see what happens to the older folks around me that don't have purpose and meaning. And
right.
it's not good.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I took a workshop with Gretchen Miller recently on, she does this every year. I'll do a little thing for her, a little PR for her. She does every year, she does a board book, of intentions. And
Ooh.
yeah, so that it's great. And then she meets with us throughout the year a couple of times. And in fact, I took that because I hate board books. I hate board books. When I do altered books, I would tell Angel, no board books, no textbooks. We must have sewn in signatures. I mean, I was difficult, you know. In fact, they always put me right next to her at the summit when we're in person, because every other minute I'm running out of the room and I say, Angel, do you have this? Do you have that? And every year when we've done it in person, she's always given me a gift, lent me a gift. Look at this cool thing. Check it out. One year it was I don't know what, it was a paper wrinkler. You put your paper through
Oh,
this.
yes, that thing was awesome.
It was amazing. Yeah, that was one.
Yes.
I buy it. Everything and then one year it was a corner cutter, and every year she shows me something different. So I'm excited. I don't know what she's going to bring me this year, or she gives me a book that she found one year. I couldn't believe it. We were in New York, and she gave me a book on, I think it was on space, and it was no joke, at least 2 feet wide by maybe 2.5 feet high. It weighed a ton. And I'm like, how am I you can alter this book. I'm thinking, how am I getting it home on the train? And I took the book and I altered the book. I mean, so she's really great. And she's just a wizard with putting things together for the summit. So I'm really excited to see her. I haven't seen her in a few years, so this will be great. But yeah, I mean, the passion that it's what sustains us, and the
Mhm.
purpose. If we don't have
Yeah.
passion, it's unlikely that you're going to have purpose, because purpose without passion dies quickly. It doesn't
Mhm.
get maintained. So I think you have to love what you do. And when people hear my passion for this work, I wasn't even, I when I went to grad school, my first stint was in kids for 6 months, and they had behavioral problems. They were scary, most of them. They were wild. And then I did 6 months in a partial program with psychotic adults, that was my interest. I loved it. The crazier, the better. I loved it. The artwork is brilliantly amazing. And it is the way to communicate with folks who cannot articulate anything in any linear way, because they are intruded with voices and all kinds of other stuff. So my first job, I was hired to work on a unit with a locked unit with people who were either suicidal, homicidal, or psychotic, or all three combined, or whatever, and geriatrics. And I remember my soon-to-be boss during my interview saying, do you work with geriatrics? And I'm like, oh, I love working with geriatrics, which of course I didn't have any interest in working with geriatrics, but I wanted the job. It was a fabulous job. And she pointed to a drawing behind her and said, what do you think of this? And I told her what I thought about the artwork and my impressions and things that were going on. And because I am trained also analytically, I was psychodynamically trained, that was my framework, and had a great training at Hahnemann, which is now Drexel, and
Mm.
university. And it was a medical model. We were being trained with the psychiatry interns and residents. So I got the job. Oh, well, actually, I said I was already getting ready to start another job, and I said to her, I'm starting another job on Monday. If you want me, you need to tell me today. And she said, okay, you have the job if you want it. And I called the other job, which I was starting on Monday, and said, I cannot start the job. I took this job, and that was it. So I did this work for 2 years, and then allegedly was working with folks that had dissociative identity disorder, known as multiple personality, then in the
Sure.
late 70s and 80s, and didn't really believe it. And then late in 1979, a woman came in, and she had done something. I won't share it. It was pretty
Sure.
graphic, to herself, and almost passed on that. And she did a set of drawings, and when she was on a 1-to-1, I saw her do the artwork. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't see it. She left. I looked at the artwork, and I thought, oh my goodness, if there is such a thing as this diagnosis, this is it. And I fell in love. And that's what happened. So all of a sudden, I was being trained by one of the psychiatrists with the residents, with the psychiatric residents. People didn't believe in the diagnosis, all of this business about abuse and whatever. I was actually instructed at the time with several people on the staff that, we don't do this work here. Can you imagine? They
What?
weren't permitted. You weren't permitted to ask about abuse. We didn't do that. That wasn't something that was discussed. It was not within my job description to ask this question. And I was saying,
Wow.
yeah, that was, that do not talk about it. It wasn't my job. But I was seeing things in the artwork and I thought, oh my goodness, look at this. What is this about? And these consistent things. Anyhow, this young woman and I started working together individually. And in 1980, I got my ATR. That's all we had then, my registered art therapist credential. And she was being discharged after being in the hospital for 1 year. I worked with her 3 days a week individually and 5 days a week in a group. And she said, will you be part of my therapy team when I'm discharged? And I said, I guess I'm starting my practice. And that's how it started in 1980. And so of course, these folks with this horrific trauma history generally, or very often, have disordered eating patterns as well. And so and they self-harm. So my specialization is, eating disorders, cutters, and dissociative work. And I'm still doing it. So that's super exciting. Yeah. Since COVID hit, I'm also working with a lot of kids now, not with trauma with kids, not with capital T trauma, because I think it's really hard to manage that. Generally, the rule of thumb is if you're going to take on a new case, you need to be able to commit to 5 years. And at this point, in my life cycle, I'm not sure that I can commit to individual therapy 5 years. I'm not sure. So I'm really careful, but they have a lot of anxiety post-COVID, attachment issues. So I'm having this amazing, the other day, a little 9-year-old young man played the flute for me. We were talking about him. He was so adorable. Amongst other things, we do surveys and we talk about personalities and we tie it up to how he doesn't feel good about himself. I diagnosed him through video chat with ASD, with autism. He was on the spectrum.
Oh, sure.
So, all of a sudden, there are many things you can do.
Yeah.
Which is,
With the digital platform, I mean, we're able to have this conversation together and see each other, even though it's going to be published audio. I think that COVID was tough, and that was a tough couple of years of like the shutdown. But what I think it did is it really thrust us forward into confronting the fears around the technology and the use of technology in a way that it kind of forced people to say, okay, well, this is the only thing that I have available. So I have to acquaint myself with it. I have to learn how to use it, which that takes a lot of effort to learn how to use all of this stuff effectively and feel comfortable with it. It's really anxiety provoking when something's not working the way you think it's supposed to, and you're not a tech person. Like, how do I get it to work?
absolutely. I even sent you an email asking if these AirPod things I had were good enough to do this. I didn't even know because I've never done this before. So, but the other thing that it has afforded, I agree with you. I mean, it has been a terrible course of years with a lot of loss and devastation. We know that, with COVID. I mean, it's been horrible in so many ways. But we've also really been challenged to do exactly what you mentioned before, find meaning. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Is there meaning in what I'm doing? Do I feel purpose? I think we're looking at that more seriously maybe than ever before.
I
I'm making more
agree.
art. Oh yeah, I'm making more art than I ever have in my entire life. Because I realize how important it is as a creative arts therapist to be doing that and how much I learn about myself, my experiences in the world. And it's been a container too when I've needed to do that. So that's been really amazing. It also, the focal point for treatment is really, I've really had to funnel in exactly what I want to be doing and when I want to be doing it. So
Mm.
I don't, if I can help it, I'm not working on Mondays anymore, and I'm only doing half a Friday, So I have a couple of concentrated days. So I have some time to do other things like run the Pennsylvania Art Therapy Association board right now. So, which I was sort of fell into backwards too, should have nominated when I was sneezing and said, what? And voted in. And because that needed to happen, but I've been on the board and I'm super excited to do this. I mean, it's just been an incredible, I'm just new at it, but it's an incredible over the last few months, learning and working together with people. We just did an in-person retreat, which was a suggestion
Oh,
I
how fun.
just for the board. And we came up with goals, and we had workshops, all art-based, to approach various things, including team building, because we never met each other. We're
Wow.
great, so it was great. I mean, it was great. One person had an emergency with her pet and couldn't fly in from Pittsburgh. We ended up Zooming her in, and we carried her around with everything we did. So, yes, this offers and affords us many things, including over the 3 years, medical care. I had to engage in some, serious questioning about something, and I had top people in the field to work with this way, so we're really lucky, but it has had us all maybe looking a little bit more seriously about what we want to be doing. How much of it do we need to be doing? Can
Hmm.
we do less and be a little happier?
Yeah.
Because we're saving on the commute. I don't have an office, so I can be more careful about, how many people I want to work with at any given time. I mean, that's always been part of my balancing act as a therapist, trying to balance, my caseload.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you pick up a case and it turns out to be the darn dissociator who's cutting and has an eating disorder, a trifecta. And I am going to be working my butt off, nonstop with intense clinical care. But, you balance it out. So, yeah, I think it has taught us a lot.
Yeah.
COVID. And it's saddened us too, but if we can find a light in that, there are some illuminated things that happen because of it. So hope we don't
As
ever go there again, but
I hope not either. I mean, that was really torturous. But even torturous, like we do a lot of work with kids, and some kids are just, they just don't do well with this methodology. Plus, I think compounding with being on the computer all day for their educational training is like, okay, to see their therapists where normally they would have space to move and play and um, be active, to then be like, oh gosh, another thing on the computer, on the thing where I have to stay in front of this little window space. And um it was tough for
that,
them.
that took a lot of adjustment, and it isn't for everyone. I mean, when some offices started opening back up, like I just started with a young with a 12-year-old, and the mom, when she called me, I said, she gave me a little bit of a history, and I said, I do need to let you know, in this moment, I don't have a physical office. And I'm not sure if I'm going to get another one. I have actually found a really great center near me where an art therapist brilliantly connected with someone else and opened up like a rental space. So you can sort of, it's like a co-op or something. It's a
Oh,
really impressive.
cool.
Yeah. So I can rent space there if I want to, 4 hours a week but I'm just not quite sure. I don't know if I want to do that yet. So I said to mom, look, my rule of thumb for any therapy, no matter however we're meeting, is let's meet for a few sessions and see what you think. And if it feels like it could work, let's continue. And if it feels like this, whether it's in person or however it is, because it's the dynamic, it's the
Sure.
energy that happens here that's going to determine anything. And then maybe we can get through the other things. But I've had one of the amazing things is with kids particular. Let me show you my room. Let me show you, they have a sandbox where during Christmas time, some of my clients would have a whole setting of all their Christmas stuff. I'm Jewish, so we don't have that quite as lovely a setup, but they pretty much had a play therapy aquarium right there where they had these little toys and things they could work with. Or I always would send the mom, I'd find out what the child wants to work or anyone wants to work with. And I had a list of things that maybe mom could get. If they were unable to do that financially, I would just send it, whatever. Here you go. Here's a pack of a bunch of things I think would be helpful for starters. But there's so much creativity. That's the other piece. So in addition to passion, you have to have meaning and you have to be creative, because you can't, that's like a foundational piece. So there are things I get to see that I would never get to see if
So
it wasn't,
true.
so that's kind of a cool thing too, if we have to be working this way. Yeah, so I just haven't kind of reopened that yet, but I will say that I'm going to Disney and we'll probably get COVID there. So, so I'm prepared.
No, don't say that. Don't say that.
I mean, I'm hoping not, but I'm stepping out in the world too. But at this point, it's been really a couple of years of just providing this type of treatment. And this will allow me to sustain my practice longer, and yeah.
I think that there's a lot of people that did the exact same thing during COVID. They had, due to their age or health, their own health conditions, it just wasn't wise for them to go back into the office and have it open. And they decided to just permanently close and go totally virtual. And I think that's okay. Right? Like it's okay for us to change and find that, yeah, actually this is working out better. It works well for the clients, it works well for me. It's it works. I
Yep.
do kind of a hybrid. I have people that come in person, but I also have, people that they're like now after COVID, they're like, I want to work virtually. Do you offer that?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because it's convenient. You think about the commute when you're committing to an hour a week of therapy, depending upon where someone's coming from, the traffic patterns in the community that you're in, that might be 3 hours of their day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to be able to, come on virtually from wherever they're at,
Mhm.
it makes sense for them too. Um,
Yes,
but
I've also found that, with some people who have a family and they may not, like their kids may come home and they can't, getting care for their children or for someone else in the family, a parent, someone, anyone, you know, arranging for care. They don't have to do that. They can just, go into a private space, do their thing, have a headset on, and do the best they can. There are issues too, confidentiality and keeping it quiet, and sound. I've had several clients encourage them to get a sound machine, and the kids know if the
sure,
sound machine is going on, unless there's something urgent, to leave the parent or whoever's, the older sister. And I'm also very careful about that too, to make sure that they do have a private space. They're not going to be intruded upon. All those things have to be worked out. You have to know that you can create somewhat of a safe environment, obviously, in order for the therapy to hold, for the environment to be safe, to hold the material. But yeah, it's worked out. And with some people, for me also, I can have later hours. I don't have to drive home and get home at 10 o'clock at night,
because you're already home.
already here. So I can have a session till 8:30 or even 9 o'clock. I'm not loving it necessarily, but I can. I'm actually sometimes, like this week, I have heavier evening hours than I do during the day. My first client starts tomorrow at 4:30 or 4 o'clock. And then I have a
Wow.
run with 5 people, but it's okay because during the day I can take a walk and I can do other
Mhm.
errands and things. I can, whatever. I can work on other things I need to be doing, and have dinner. I can have a break for dinner if I want. So I'm not, it allows me to be working a little bit later on nights when I do need to do that. And also adapt my schedule if I have a conference to go to, or, I'm going to go away. I haven't figured out how I'll do that yet for the summit, but I won't have hours during that 4-day period. And I'll probably load up heavier earlier in the week with hours on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and even into the night. So you can take a siesta in the afternoon, because
Yeah.
you can take a few hours, do the things you need to do, relax, and come back in like they do in Europe and work from, 5 to 8 or 9
Yep.
if you need. So, which allows more people to get therapy who maybe would not be able to engage. And so
Right.
that's
Because their
another.
work schedule.
Right. So all in all, I mean, it's been, there are boundaries and barriers to everything. And I think when they arise, we have to embrace them and figure out, okay, how can this work?
Hmm.
I had one client that was notoriously late. She was, and I kept moving her appointment later and later. And then she started doing appointments like from her car on video. And I finally just said, it doesn't work for me. This is not something I feel comfortable doing ethically. You're in a car. Well, certainly not, not driving, but it's
Sure.
dark. I can't see you. How are we drawing? How are we going to conduct this? It just didn't seem that it was working. And I said, well, at some point, if you feel we can come up with a better opportunity to work, let's retry this. But at this point, her schedule shifted so drastically that she was doing a 2-job thing. And I was the in-between job in a parking lot in the door. Yeah. So there are times when you just have to decide this isn't working, just like virtual medical appointments, which if you have a sore throat, like you really want to be seen. You don't want to do
Right.
this, just the description is not enough. So, yeah. And during COVID, when I had an opportunity, if I had something going on that needed a look, if a doctor was willing to see me, I would go with, an N95 and another one, like 3 of them on or something crazy. But, I was safe. But it was different in therapy because that was the other problem. If I did open up my office earlier on, and I still mask when I go places. So not when I'm eating dinner in a restaurant, but I try to go at off times. But the thought of being in a mask in a session, so I couldn't see the client's face, was to me not a good enough trade-off to get rid of this virtual opportunity when I could see
Yeah.
them. Of course, I couldn't see other things, but
It's really hard. It's really, really hard when you have a mask and they have a mask. I realized how much I rely on lip reading when I'm in like an environment where there's a lot of noise. So like a couple days a week I go into a local crisis stabilization facility and do art therapy groups with the kids and teens that are involuntarily hospitalized there. And of course, the hospital doesn't shut down. It didn't shut down unless there was a case of COVID. Then there was like a whole protocol that happened, and I wouldn't go while they were, restabilizing the space. But then once it was reopened, then I would return. But throughout, there was the masks, and all the kids are masked. I'm masked. And, in those environments, there's like nothing to absorb sound. So it's always real, like this cacophony. Like it's like hard to pay attention and really hear, especially if it's like a really shy, reserved kid who barely is audible anyway. And then you're like, what? What did you say? Like, I don't even have the benefit of being able to look at your lips to really try and understand what you're saying. It was really hard.
yeah. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine it. When some of my colleagues went back because they maintained their space, and I still had my space. And there was somebody who was subletting for me, and I told her she could use this space, but I came up with a protocol for, wiping things down. Those days, we were wiping crayons down. We thought you could catch it in other ways. So, every door handle in the building I was in had to be wiped down. I mean, you had to leave a half hour between a client to wipe down spaces. And
Yes.
that became problematic. That one office in Pennsylvania had 3 windows, which was great because I could open the windows. But in the winter, I
Oh,
couldn't imagine. It's going to be freezing. We're all masked up. I also bought a shield, which I never even wore. This expensive like a motorcycle helmet. I'm like, I can't practice like this. It was alien. I thought, I just
it
can't do it.
was.
I can't
Yeah.
do it. And some of my colleagues got COVID anyway, bringing people in. And
Yeah.
I just thought, if my anxiety about practicing in that way is going to supersede my capability of practicing well, then I shouldn't do it that way. So, and I don't think I did not lose one client when I went virtual. First of all, in the beginning, because they were still in the same boat, everything was a lockdown, so they weren't going anywhere either, except for the very few cases that were mandatory to show up on a job, hospital workers and things like that. So they had to go in. But
Yeah.
it became, it just seemed to be a situation that people were happy that they didn't have to go anywhere. And then when
Yeah.
the world started opening up again, they didn't want, I closed Jersey. So now all my Jersey people would have to come to Pennsylvania. So it was an hour drive for them. Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm like, well, I have a license still. So, and they were granting a license, a reciprocity license between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and probably vice versa, I think, but certainly PA to New Jersey. The state board was sanctioning, if you were an LPC in Pennsylvania, you could get a temporary LPC in Jersey to provide service. So, and the problem with that is I have colleagues that did do that, and certainly took overflow from me when I had too many referrals coming in. But then after a while, like they then took it away. And then
Oh,
all these,
no.
yeah. And they couldn't sit for the LPC board anymore because that became a done deal at one point. Not as art therapists. You weren't just grandfathered in. You had to actually take other credentialing. It was a whole big ordeal. So yeah. So those people who were in their practice they were scrambling. So my practice got a little bigger because I took on those folks. So yeah. So there's, and now they're looking at, I forget what they're calling it. The compact. It's a collective
The
compact.
counselor
Yeah.
compact.
Yeah. So that, that may bring a whole nother piece into it.
Yeah.
But I've been lucky because so it's worked out, which is a good thing. And I still love what I'm doing. And
Yeah.
the hardest part is getting anyone kind of under the age of 12 I have to get their artwork. I want their artwork. So they may not have
Sure.
a phone, and then I have to engage the parent who then has to see the artwork, or they hold it up. I ask for permission, I take a picture and then show it to them after I crop it and get them out of it, but it's never clear, So I like to keep a record of the artwork. That is one of the snags, how to do that. It's all another way to learn how to do it, Yeah.
Right. We have to make the best of, what we have. It's that maybe it's not ideal, but it's still, I think it's like, even if it's not ideal, is it still effective? Is it still helping the client? And I think that's the most important part, right? That yes, it's helping the client. And, if we can't get a copy of their image, that's okay. They have it. They experienced it, and that was what needed to happen for them. And maybe we can't, I know like a lot of our therapists like to kind of look at the progression of artwork, have the client look at all the pieces over time. And so maybe we don't have that same ability, but can we recall it and
Of
think
course.
of right and engage them with that in a different way? It may not be ideal, but it's still possible, right? We kind of have to get creative. As you were saying, we need that creativity to work through the problems. And we don't have access to our creativity if we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to find balance,
Of course. Of
right?
course. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, typically, I mean, I will ask, well, no different than in a personal in-person session. If a client destroys artwork, it's theirs to do that with. We can encourage them not to, but I will ask them, can you, keep your artwork somewhere, find a place for it. If they're kids, I tell the parent, stay out of it, get a folder, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, I mean, the best thing is I need my GPS, I need my Waze to tell me how to get somewhere. But if I need to remember your artwork, it's right in my head. Remember that piece you did? And it looks like and they'll go, oh, I have that. And so we can take a look at it that way. because the new images might have there might be some paralleling with something else. And maybe can you hold that up? Was that different? Or you take a look, tell me what you see. But exactly, I think you're 100% right. Because someone can create something, turn it over and say, I don't even want to talk about it in a session. And that's okay
True.
too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So they're just adaptive ways that have forced us to look at life a little differently. I'm glad that there are more things happening in person. I'm also glad that I took a workshop with Northern California, a full day deal with them in the last couple of years. I've taken workshops from someone who was in Germany. I mean, you can take a workshop from anyone in the world now. You can go to things you could never go to before, and you can go. I've had people attending my workshops. The other day, somebody had like a retina detachment. She did a workshop with me without that. She was in dark
Wow.
glasses, nothing visual. She was completely off camera. I mean, there are so many things you can do. I did the LA Summit. I was tired because the time difference is a little different, but I got to take 2 fascinating workshops, which I would not have gone to LA because it's so expensive to go. There's so many other things that we have to do. So it's afforded us opportunity to do workshops and do incredible things. The Infinite Minds group in Florida, out of Orlando, Infinite Minds, they had a workshop this year. They had 600 this is all folks with dissociation and complex trauma. It's for consumers. Basically, there are other workshops too. I presented there once when they had a workshop up in Belmont. They had a conference up in Massachusetts, kind of a satellite conference. They had 600 people. Why? 300 came in person and 300 folks who could not receive this level of contact with others who share this same narrative and learn about coping strategies. 600 people for a conference. That's amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, a
Awesome.
consumer like
All consumer
yeah,
based.
that is
So
amazing. That's really large.
it's really large. And it started as a little, tiny little group and continued to grow and grow. And then over COVID, they started doing things like this,
Mhm.
virtually. And then I think, and I don't know if this was their first hybrid, but this was, I think, their first hybrid and in person, but I think they doubled the number of people that came last year. So look at all the folks who can learn more about treatment and treatment options and coping strategies and connect with others who share their narrative. That's just amazing. So that's another
Wonderful.
great thing. So yeah. So I think it's passion. It's building those bridges in our work, and it's learning about boundaries and barriers. What are the barriers to what we want to do? How can we work them through and make it happen? Because it's either we do or we leave. You either have to figure
Right.
out a way or you can't practice. I mean, you had to adapt. So it's caused us to think in so many ways, and we're still evolving in that way. And then boundaries, okay, like 9 o'clock is the last person I'm going to see, or no, I don't work on Friday nights and I don't work on Saturday, unless there's an emergency. Of course, there's an availability, but you know, um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's good. It keeps us alive. We have to be able to sustain ourselves too in order to do the work. So
mhm.
without those elements, we can't do it.
No, I think that the workshop for therapists on Soul Collage, giving them that opportunity to just engage in that process for themselves, to tune in and check in. What are their needs? Where am I saying yes to things I don't want to say yes to, which is cutting me off from the things I really want to say yes to? You know, that like illuminating piece of shining a light on those parts and areas in our life that are kind of not working so well is important. It's important in helping us to create a practice for ourselves that works for us, right? Like,
Absolutely. I mean, the big takeaway though is that that process is also going to be something that they can learn more about. I didn't start using Soul Collage even in a very gentle way, as an art therapist. So we have a little bit more liberty without being trained as an art therapist to just kind of try it out, for example, for a while. I mean, I think I took 3 or 4 workshops, including 2 of those were full days at the summit, before I decided, I think I'm gonna, I'm gonna test this out maybe on a one-to-one and just see how this works. And then I decided I'm going to do the training, because immersing myself in 4 days of this is going to help. And it did help. It helped me understand a book that seemed like it was written in another language. I just couldn't get it. It was just really confusing. And once I took the 4 days where we are actually looking at all those components of the process and how it connects up therapeutically. And there is a group, there is a Soul Collage group on the website, on World of Soul Collage, which is for therapists. So therapists can actually talk to other therapists about using it in that way. There are other people who use it as therapeutically, but not therapy, because they're not therapists. So you can bring it in many, in many ways. And the training helps you understand how to do that and how to do it ethically, because no matter what we do, when we bring something in, we have to work within a scope of practice that we understand how does this mesh and work with our trained way, and how do we use this ethically and responsibly. And so I'm super excited about it, because it'll be a full day, and it's just a great method. It's a great method that translates to virtual. It's super easy to work this way, because you just need a lot of images and a couple of supplies, and then we go to town with different narratives and sequencing, and we partner up, and you learn a lot. And of course, the training is talked about a bit, and also the potential for using this. How can we? Yeah. And then hopefully we get more trainers, more people who, I actually, in our retreat on the 18th of March for Pennsylvania, for the board, I facilitated a Soul Collage workshop where I asked everyone, it was 1 hour, I asked everybody on the board to think about their committee members, the parts of themselves, and jot down about 10, including the ones that are, I don't know what we want to call them, adversarial parts, the more, like I have a Cruella, I will tell you, Cruella is around. I have a Cruella part. My family knows her well. And every once in a while she'll appear. I could be maybe in a department store where I get a little irritated, or maybe I haven't had lunch and I don't have patience. And I'll say, well, if this doesn't work, then, maybe I should talk to your manager. And my husband will say, Cruella. Well, that part is a part of me. She's a part of me. And she is also instrumental because she says what she needs to say. Now,
she's an advocate.
She can be an advocate. So I asked the board to think about one of their committee members who is instrumental and could help in their board position. They created incredible cards, and we broke into dyads. We did a narrative around the card to tell us a little bit more about themselves. And then we shared individually with the group as a whole, just a little teeny bit about this part of me and how I thought this part could be helpful, So it was great. It was that. It was communal. And that's another really important point with Soul Collage. Seena Frost created Soul Collage to be done in community. She had a very strong vision for this methodology, that it would bring people together, help them communicate, and illuminate conversation. So, so I'm super excited to be there to do this, even though it's virtual. I think it lends itself really well. We have breakout rooms. I'll never forget when I learned how to do that on the summit. I thought, oh my God, this is the best. And people could go into dyads or into triads and work together. And you can facilitate the same framework you could do in person with Soul Collage this way. So that was pretty cool too. And in the group that I do, we do this monthly with other Soul Collage facilitators who I was trained with. We've been meeting since 2019. Every month we meet.
Wow.
Every month. And one of us facilitates something. So we might learn about something somewhere, or try something, and we give it a whirl. One of us is, I'm an art therapist and other things. Another person is a music therapist, and one is a reverend. Everyone has different life roles. We're not all therapists. So when someone will ask a question about, I'm thinking about doing someone just brought something up, and it was a bit worrisome to me as a therapist because I thought it would open up too much for the group she was working with. I could tell her that clinically I would be a little bit concerned because you're opening some things up, and then how are you going to put it back together? So we came up with a better framework. So we kind of work with each other, and it's just great. We continue to practice. Anyway, that's also really, really nice if someone decides to do more formal training. But the summit, I don't know if they're trying to think if there was anything else in this last even in the singular sessions. I think I've been the only one to do Soul Collage through the singular sessions that this Expressive Therapy Summit has worked on. There have been some other Soul Collage facilitators. I don't know what's on the agenda for the June workshop, but and generally we all have a different take on it. We're working on it from a different vantage point.
Sure.
So you can get a couple of trainings and see if it suits you, but it's great for all therapists, really a wonderful way
Yeah.
of, and a great way to have some fun with stepping into your own soul, so to speak, and getting a better take on where you are. So at our board retreat, one of our board members afterwards sent me a text message and said, "This was so incredibly informative for me that I am going to get training." So she's going to sign up to become a soul philosopher.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah. And that's like, I was so excited. I thought that's really great. I'm sure she wants to get away from her family for 4 days too. Into a training where you can just make art and be with others who in unity want to do that. But
So
that was,
true.
yeah, I think that's one of the vantage points when people walk away and say, this was fun. It was informative. I get it. I'm going to take another workshop somewhere. I think this has some potential for me in my work. Yeah. And it's a
Yeah.
really great way to invite conversation. So
No, it sounds like people will walk away with a lot of tools in their tool bag for the self of the therapist, but also the professional role of the therapist, which anytime that we can be working on those two at the same time, I think is really helpful for us. Because it's hard sometimes to make that bulk of time, like to dedicate 4 whole days to just be immersed in the art process. That doesn't happen too often. But there's just not enough time in the week to do something like that. So to be able to do that, to nourish your own soul while learning tools to bring into your clinical work, I think is a really great opportunity. And so, for listeners, if you're thinking about it, I highly recommend that you check out the Expressive Therapy Summit website, and that's just www.expressivetherapysummit.com. And for the Soul Collage workshop that Mindy's going to be facilitating on April 22nd, you just click on the virtual summit tab, and then that will open up, and you can put in there Soul Collage, and her session will pop up, or you can look for it by date by that April 22nd, and you can attend from anywhere because it's online. But she's also going to be teaching in June at the Atlantic City event, and that's going to be a full day on altered books and possibly 3 hours on another day, Soul Collage. And then she will also be participating in the virtual November East Coast Summit. So even if you don't get to take her workshop in April, there's other opportunities to learn from her. And the virtual one in November is going to be really focused on trauma. So she's going to be participating in a trauma panel. And then there'll be a full day on altered books and probably something on Soul Collage. So lots of opportunities to learn. And if folks wanted to learn more about your practice and what you're doing, where can they find you, Mindy?
they can email me. Emailing me is probably great. I have a website that someone created for me, which is, I think it's done in another coding way, and I can't get in there. So that website, which is www.art be4words.com has not been modified in forever. You can get an old bio. It's like at least 10 or 12 years old. So best way is to email me, which is my full name, Mindy Jacobson-Levy @gmail.com. That's probably great. And in the subject line, put in, I'm interested in Soul Collage, or I'm interested in altered books, or I'm interested in supervision, or whatever your interest base is, and I would be happy to get back to you. That's probably the easiest way, because the website is always going to be worked on, and I think I'm just going to start all fresh and start over with that. So
That's probably a good idea. Whatever code was fresh 10 years ago is probably antiquated now. And there's probably an easy method that would be so much easier for you, some kind of drop and drag thing that would work better. But I'll put your email in the show notes, so if people wanted to reach out to you, that they can.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to make time out of everything that you're doing to speak with me about your work. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really blessed to be a part of the summit, so I'm excited about that and look forward to more teaching there. And this is a great way to share that work. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for listening to the Voices from the Expressive Therapy Summit special series on the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us share the work of the therapists that we interview with other therapists that are interested in learning about how people are using the creative process to do the work that we do. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Mindy. She is so full of energy and passion about the work that she does. And I hope that when I reach that point in my career, that I am still so passionate and alive by the work. I mean, it doesn't sound like she has that she's going to be slowing down anytime soon, which I think is really cool. All right, everybody, if you are interested in taking her workshop or any of the other amazing therapists that are teaching at the Expressive Therapy Summit, head over to the website, www.expressivetherapysummit.com. You can click on any variety of the tabs and you'll find out about the upcoming offerings for the rest of the year, whether they're in person or whether they're online.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.